July 2013. California's prison system trembles as more than 29,000 inmates push their food trays away. From inside the stark concrete boxes of Pelican Bay's security housing unit, men who haven't touched sunlight in decades orchestrate the largest prisoner hunger strike in U.S. history. What drove them to risk death? And how did this act of defiance reshape solitary confinement nationwide? Pelican Bay State Prison opened in 1989 near Crescent City, California, as a purpose-built supermax designed for the state's worst of the worst. Its security housing unit, SHU, windowless, sound-dampened cells measuring 8 by 10 feet, kept thousands in near-total isolation. Prisoners were confined at least 22.5 hours a day, with no contact visits and minimal outdoor exercise in concrete dog runs. By 2011, frustration boiled over. A first hunger strike, launched by SHU prisoners, drew 6,600 participants statewide. It ended after limited promises of reform, but left inmates skeptical. When key leaders such as Todd Ashker, Arturo Castellanos, and Antonio Guillen saw little change 2 years later, they planned a second, bigger strike. Using clandestine notes, kites, passed through legal mail and visits, they built a cross-racial coalition, Black, Latino, and white prisoners agreeing on 5 core demands, from ending indefinite SHU terms to improving medical care and nutrition. On July 8, 2013, the strike began. What made it unprecedented was its scale. Within days, 29,000 inmates across 2/3 of California's prisons refused meals. At Pelican Bay alone, more than 1,000 SHU prisoners participated. Family members on the outside formed support networks, holding vigils in Sacramento and Los Angeles, tweeting updates and urging the press to cover the story. The 5 core demands included end long-term solitary for alleged gang affiliation without serious rule violations, provide timely and adequate medical care, improve food quality and quantity, expand programming, phone calls, and access to educational resources, establish fair and transparent procedures for gang validation and SHU release. California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, CDCR, initially dismissed the action as a gang-orchestrated disturbance. Yet the strike's breadth, cross-racial, non-violent, and sustained, forced lawmakers and national media to take notice. The Los Angeles Times, The Guardian, and NPR all ran stories on the hunger strikers within weeks. For the men inside the SHU, the strike meant discipline stacked on top of deprivation. Participants lost weight rapidly, 10, 20, even 30 pounds. Some fainted during the brief exercise periods. Others were placed in administrative segregation or had canteen privileges cut. Yet they held to a no-violence principle to preserve public sympathy. Medical staff made daily rounds but sometimes marked prisoners refusing treatment. The death of Billy Guero, a 32-year-old Pelican Bay inmate, became a flashpoint. He died on July 22, 2013, after filing repeated medical requests while on strike. Advocacy groups accused the state of ignoring warning signs. His death was reported by the Associated Press, The Guardian, and prisoner rights organizations as a grim reminder of the stakes. Outside, families amplified his story, holding up his photo at rallies. Legislators like Assemblymember Tom Ammiano announced hearings on solitary confinement. Pressure built on CDCR to negotiate, even as officials tried to wait the strike out. By the 3rd week of July 2013, the hunger strike had turned into a political crisis. Assemblymember Tom Ammiano, chair of California's Public Safety Committee, and Senator Lonnie Hancock announced public hearings on solitary confinement. They cited letters from family members describing loved ones wasting away, and testimony from experts on the psychological effects of long-term isolation. National outlets like the New York Times and The Guardian framed the strike as a test of California's prison reform commitments. Inside Pelican Bay, strike leaders smuggled out messages urging nonviolence and discipline. "This is not about gangs," one note read. "This is about human rights." Advocacy groups like the Prisoner Hunger Strike Solidarity Coalition coordinated press calls, while Amnesty International issued statements condemning indefinite solitary confinement as a violation of international norms. Even as the hunger strike unfolded, Legal action intensified. Attorneys representing SHU prisoners had already filed Ashker vs. Governor of California, challenging indefinite solitary on Eighth Amendment and due process grounds. During July and August, lawyers brought affidavits from striking inmates into federal court, documenting weight loss, denied medical care, and retaliation. The lawsuit gained momentum. Federal judges ordered CDCR to improve medical monitoring for strikers and to disclose data about how many were refusing meals. This legal dimension gave the protest added leverage. It wasn't just a moral appeal, but a case moving through the courts. News stories highlighted how California kept thousands of men in solitary for 10, 15, even 20 years, far longer than the United Nations Mandela Rules 15-day standard. Outside prison walls, families became the movement's human face. Mothers, wives, and children of SHU prisoners held vigils at the state capitol, SU's, home traveling hundreds of miles from Los Angeles or the Central Valley. They carried enlarged photographs of their loved ones and placards reading, "End torture in California prisons." Civil rights leaders and clergy joined them, turning hearings into moral spectacles. Media coverage shifted. Instead of depicting the strike as a gang plot, local stations began interviewing tearful family members and showing empty trays inside prison cafeterias. Legislators who had long ignored solitary confinement now faced questions from reporters about whether California's policies were humane or legal. By early August, the toll on strikers was severe. Prison medical staff reported dozens of inmates hospitalized for severe weight loss, dehydration, or heart irregularities. Some prisoners, like Todd Ashker, had gone more than 50 days consuming only water and occasional vitamins. Conditions in the SHU, fluorescent lights, constant noise from ventilation, 23-hour lockdown, magnified the physical strain. CDCR began issuing disciplinary write-ups for participating in a disturbance, which could lengthen SHU terms. Yet strike leaders urged calm. "We must not give them an excuse to dismiss us as violent," one statement said. Prisoner rights groups and newspapers published these messages, underscoring the discipline behind the protest. Even skeptical commentators began acknowledging the action's unprecedented scale and organization. Behind the scenes, negotiations slowly emerged. State officials offered small concessions, extra yard time, expanded canteen lists, but strikers held out for deeper reforms. When assembly hearings convened in late August, expert witnesses described solitary's mental health effects, while CDCR executives faced tough questions about gang validation policies. On September 5, 2013, after 59 days without food for some, leaders called off the strike. They cited commitments from lawmakers to hold further hearings, and from CDCR to review SHU policies. Attorneys for the prisoners signaled that Ashker vs. Governor of California would continue pressing for systemic change. Although many demands remained unmet, the hunger strike had forced solitary confinement out of the shadows and onto the front pages. When the trays were picked up and the strike formally ended on September 5, 2013, the legal fight intensified. Todd Ashker, one of the SHU leaders, had his name on the class action suit Ashker v. Governor of California. Filed by the Center for Constitutional Rights, it argued that keeping men in solitary for decades without meaningful review violated the Eighth Amendment's ban on cruel and unusual punishment and the 14th Amendment's due process protections. Through 2014, attorneys gathered evidence, psychological evaluations, data on how many prisoners had been in the SHU for more than 10 years, and expert testimony from neuroscientists about the effects of isolation on the human brain. Media outlets reported on jaw-dropping figures. Some 500 men had spent more than 10 consecutive years in Pelican Bay's SHU. Even mainstream law and order voices began questioning whether California's policy was defensible. The hunger strike and lawsuit changed the political climate in Sacramento. Committees held repeated hearings, and reporters filled the hearing rooms. Former SHU prisoner Issy testified about hallucinations, self-harm, and the slow erosion of social skills after years without human contact. Family members described how children had grown up never touching their fathers. Under this pressure, the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, CDCR, announced in 2015 that it would overhaul its gang validation system and dramatically reduce the use of indefinite solitary. The new step-down program created clear criteria for SHU exit and offered programming aimed at reintegration into general population. Lawmakers framed these changes as a direct response to the courage of the hunger strikers. Before 2011, solitary confinement in California was largely invisible. By 2013, thanks to the strike, the term security housing unit had entered public debate. The New York Times, Los Angeles Times, The Guardian, and NPR produced feature pieces and documentaries. Even international outlets covered Pelican Bay. Editorial boards that once ignored prisoners now called indefinite solitary torture. Advocacy groups like the Prisoner Hunger Strike Solidarity Coalition and legal nonprofits leveraged this media attention to press for deeper reforms. Students, clergy, and human rights activists held teach-ins and demonstrations. By shifting the narrative from gang management to human rights crisis, the strike changed how the public perceived California's toughest prison. As settlement talks progressed, hundreds of SHU prisoners were transferred into general population yards. Many had been in isolation for 10, 15, or 20 years. The transition was jarring. Some inmates had never used a cell phone, seen a flat-screen TV, or eaten in a chow hall with others since the early 1990s. Prison staff were not always prepared to support these transitions. Mental health services lagged. Some men thrived, reconnecting with family, taking college courses, while others struggled with anxiety and sensory overload. Reporters following these cases noted how the hunger strike had succeeded in breaking the policy of indefinite solitary, but left California facing a new challenge: how to reintegrate men after decades of extreme isolation. By the time California officially settled Ashker versus Governor of California in 2015, hundreds of men were out of the SHU, yet the psychological toll lingered. Clinical researchers who were allowed into Pelican Bay after the reforms documented high rates of anxiety, sleep disorders, paranoia, and difficulty with social interaction among men released from long-term isolation. Some prisoners described panic attacks in crowded yards. Others had trouble maintaining eye contact or trusting even supportive staff. Advocacy groups pointed out that California's mental health system inside prisons was already strained. Ending indefinite solitary is only half the job, one attorney told the Sacramento Bee. Now the state must address the harm it caused. The hunger strike had revealed not just a policy problem, but a public health crisis created by decades of extreme isolation. Lawmakers began funding more mental health programming, but experts warned it could take years, even generations, to repair the damage. In 2013, men locked alone for decades risked their lives without lifting a weapon. Their hunger strike forced California to confront a hidden world and sparked one of the most significant prison reforms in state history. The struggle did not end with new policies. Many still bear the scars of solitary, but their stand changed the conversation about punishment, human rights, and justice in America.